Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild Sullivan reading to you a piece called Memorial to Might Have Been. Dad came to my graduation. He said he was proud. For months after, on visits to family and friends, he carried the program with him, flipping the pages to show them each mention of my name, the summa cum laude, the program distinction, the various scholarships and awards. Like the others who came for me that day, when the ceremony ended, he too gave me one of the bloomless, darkened roses hawked in the entrance to the gymnasium. Sick as he was, he made the drive, endured hours on a backless bleacher, and dozed through the visiting dignitary's speech on ecology without later making his usual comments about tree-hugging liberals. He even endured the palpable tension between my ex-husband, there because our daughter was graduating also, and my new lover. Dad came to my graduation, 26 years late. My father was an important man. His diplomas gleamed on the walls of his office, proud in their cherry wood frames behind their Windex glass, sporting their fine gold seals and important signatures. Everywhere I went, people knew him, and therefore me. In the sprouting suburban townships that surrounded his office, being his offspring was akin to being the daughter of celebrity. He was the handsome family doctor with the suave bedside manner, the melodious tenor in the church choir, fellow in the radiology lab, founder of the first emergency facility in the area. He was the guy who made the local news for the quirky oddities of his upstanding life, the sheer abundance of his handsome children, the Greyhound bus in his driveway that he converted into a camper, his starring roles in the local run of Oklahoma, South Pacific, the parish play. Growing up, I fed on him and on books about others like him, those who accomplished. I listened as the women talked about making or dismantling holiday meals, but I never pictured myself as them, at least not as only them. In the work of authors, I escaped the loneliness of being the daughter of the man the town knew better than I. Escaped the loneliness that became mine as my mother, who bore 12 surviving children in 14 and a half years, fulfilled the role of Catholic wife and penultimate breeder. Literature became my mother, my father's accomplishments my model, and other people's lives my realities. Besides the mystery stories, Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, my father's already antique set of Jerry Todd and Papillote, I also ate biographies, and though with few exceptions the heroes were always male, I managed to think that I could accomplish also. It was a form of female code switching required of little girls who read in the 50s and 60s. Protagonists just weren't female. From the time we learned to read with Dick and Jane, we were conditioned to see ourselves watching from the sidelines. Oh, so pretty in our patent leather Oxfords, our skirts held out by crinoline petticoats, Mama in the kitchen, Jane needing Dick's rescue as she painted herself into the back of the clubhouse. So, as we read, we put ourselves in the male roles. At least, I did. When I wasn't Nancy Drew, who managed to do things she wasn't supposed to do, I was a Hardy Boy. Or I was Francis of Assisi, seeing God, restoring churches, and lying down naked to die, true to my vow of poverty to the end. I was Shakespeare, writing plays that would be immortal. I was Dickens, changing perceptions of public institutions with my prose. I was Lincoln, walking miles to borrow books, studying by hearthlight, growing up to be president. I followed the Oregon Trail, proved my bravery in the Sundance, raided Shoshone camps for horses, and ruled England. I became whomever I found on the shelf, and the only thing I failed to imagine was that I couldn't be what I imagined. The world seemed vast and open, and I assumed the effort put into educating me had some purpose in the minds of those above me. But when family friends dropped by the house, only my brothers were asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" In class, when the priest came to visit, he would ask the same thing of the boys at the front of the room, but ignored the raised hands of the girls in the back. In class and out, like a mantra, we heard, "You'll be a wife and mother." Eventually I caught on, but a quitter I am not. So I continued to dream and to ask myself the question no one else would ask. What do you want to be when you grow up? By 11, I had begun to write. Of all the things I could think to do, somehow that seemed the most important, to have something to say and to say what I had to the world. So I worked, had my own newspaper column in the local press at 14, got a press pass to the boys' school so I could report on their sports and theater productions, submitted my poetry to the school paper, became its literary editor, and on rare occasion gave my parents a piece of my work, hoping for their praise. It was my senior year. As usual, I was firmly ensconced in some book or another, astrally projecting to faraway places, my body remaining behind me on the couch near the fireplace with the tacky painted mantle my father intended to replace. I assumed siblings were coming and going, for one was never alone in that house, but I cannot be sure, as I wasn't paying any mind. I assume also that my mother was, as usual, lost in the recesses of the to-be-refurbished kitchen, cooking again for the army that was her offspring. Dad sat, paying bills at the oversized dining room table he had made, but never quite finished. The sound of the arm of the adding machine being pulled stopped. The silence drew me from my other life within the page. I heard Dad's feet fall as he crossed Great-Grandmom's Oriental, but did not look up, hoping he would pass. The feet stopped in front of me, and he cleared his throat in the way he does just before he says something he deems important. I became aware of that panic that always sprang up whenever either parent, who for so long held my life in their hands, thought it was time to talk. I see you've decided to apply to college, he pronounced, holding up a stack of manila envelopes, fruit of months of library research. He was our post office. He went on, you need to know this. You don't have the grades for a scholarship, and I make too much money for you to get financial aid. Your brothers need my help. They'll have families to support someday, but you'll get married. It would not be a sound investment to educate a girl. I ventured something about there being no one I really wanted to marry just then, about loving to write, about doing it already for so many years, about wanting a real job, about independence. He countered with his stock political tirade on the liberal state of journalism. But Dad, I implored, I really want to write novels and things, not journalism. You can do that without college, he decreed. Your Aunt Dorothy wrote poems. You don't need school for that. I'll mail these if you want me to, but you have to understand, you'll have to pay the tuition. I won't even lend it to you. Dad mailed the forms. I was accepted at all the commuter schools and had my choice. Months later, letters began arriving from the schools where I'd have had to live on campus, saying my applications had arrived after admissions had closed. I picked Penn State for the sole reason that my brother was at Temple, and set out to get a job. 1971 was a very bad year for an 18-year-old girl with only a high school diploma. The sex-segregated one-ads read help wanted male and help wanted female, and there were marked differences in the wages of the two. After a long search, I was hired to do credit collection for a tire store. At first, I did well. Young and gullible, I listened earnestly to creditors' tales of woe, and moved by my sympathy, they walked if they had to bring their money in. But little by little, Mr. Esposito scheduled me when the store was closed and the staff gone home. And more, he told me long, sad stories about a wife who wouldn't give him any. I made $25 a week. My brother at Temple made $300. For 2 trimesters of that tri-termed year, I loved Penn State. At the height of the anti-war and women's liberation movements, the sense of activism on my satellite campus was food and air. Underground presses abounded, and I joined more than one, contributing pieces, cutting and pasting galley proofs with rubber cement, and reveling in my more real press pass. Work became the race around Mr. Esposito's desk. I quit the tire store the day he took me as a secretary to a business meeting, and on the way out turned into a motel room. When unable to pay the tuition, I quit Penn State. Mom and Dad said they hoped I'd go back someday. I struggled a while longer, waitressing, babysitting, cleaning. I moved out on my own. I starved. Ultimately, I lived the only role left to me. I married, cleaning for just room and board. Children came. I stayed. Years and years I should not have. I stayed. Long after whatever it was that was more than finance died, I stayed. Hour after week, after month, after year, I tossed in my mind, trying to intuit how I might provide my own and now my children's board and room. I stayed. I stayed until I realized that on my husband's salary, I could now get financial aid. Dad came to my graduation, sat through the environmental address, was polite to my biracial lesbian lover, shook hands with my shame-faced ex-husband. At the reception after, frail and wizened from the 2.5 years since my mother's passing, still hacking rhythmically from a pneumonia the winter before, he drew a chair up next to mine and held out a box wrapped in silver paper, a cross pen and keychain, each engraved with my name. Then, like extracting a secret from a forgotten past, his hands trembled as he held out another gift, a stiff rectangle of yellowed tissue paper. Inside, a sharp, fluted, base metal frame housed a stained, aging scrap of my own teenage handwriting, a prose poem I had written at 16. I kept this all these years, he said, like an offering. I kissed him, thanked him, excused myself to cry in the privacy of the restaurant's upscale restroom stall. I didn't want a pen and a keychain, and I didn't want a memorial of what I might have been. Suddenly, I understood the drive behind the accolades. The only present I wanted was for him to say, I was wrong.